Hey, and welcome to the Ladies in Biz podcast, where every week we have guests that are amazing female entrepreneurs. Find out how they got started and grew their business. Discover how their story can help you grow your business. Thanks for tuning in today. Here is your host, Penny Redmond.
Number one, and we have a guest today, is Carol Schulte. And Carol, if you wouldn't mind, can I read off of your bio a little bit and share with everyone?
Hey, Penny, yes, you may.
Here we go. Okay, so you are unbelievable. This is amazing. So you're an international speaker. You're a published author. You're a founder of Living B.I.G, and you're on a mission to get everyone out of their comfort zone and into their big zone. And I like the big, I spell it. It's capital B, capital I, capital G, because there's a meaning to it.
Right.
And Carol, you've lived in Ashrams in India. You've lived in a van in New Zealand. That would have been interesting. You've had dreadlocks in Thailand. You've even shaved your head for breast cancer. Unbelievable. Even bungee jumped in your birthday suit. Ow! And she certainly walks her talk, right? Anyway, you've lived in 16 different countries, and obviously your love of people and travel encouraged you to embark on remote year in 2017, which basically means that you lived in a different country every month. And you not only lived there, but you worked and hosted events as well. That's pretty scary for some of us. And also, just to give you a little bit more information, you hold your BFA in theater performance. And I think that's at Ryerson, right? It doesn't say here, but I'm pretty sure it was at Ryerson. Wow. And an MA in communications, clearly. And then when you're not doing all the work in your business and everything, you could be somewhere in South America teaching someone to surf, or you could be in Kilimanjaro in Africa climbing the mountain. Yes. And after all of that, 2 years, which is honorable that you do this, is that you volunteer as a bereavement facilitator. And also you're pretty active and you train for a triathlon. So that's pretty amazing. So that's it. Anything you want to add to there that I've missed?
No, I think you've shared more than enough. Although I will say I'm pretty serious about my carpool karaoke game. So next time we go on a road trip, you and I are going to have to do some tunes.
Oh no, I don't think you've ever heard me sing. I think people would warn you on that.
Well, it's not so much about the singing, less about the singing and more about the actions and getting into it. And I'm pretty sure you and I could find a song where we could do that together. It was fun.
So I can't thank you enough for being our very first guest. And I know I'm going to tell you this, I've told you this already, is that you are one of the main reasons that we have Ladies in Biz podcast. And when I first met you, I'm going to share something with everybody here today, is when I first met you, I went to one of your events and it was on pole dancing. And I'm not a pole dancer, but it did take me out of that fear, and what you were teaching us brought me out to that level where I was prepared to take the next step to create Ladies in Biz. And you were inspirational and you encouraged me, and that's why we're here today, and that's why you're our first guest.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I can't help but feel pretty excited, although I can't take the credit because it's you, Penny, who had the idea, had the vision, had the wherewithal to create this in the first place. You just need a little bit of a cheerleader and a nudge to say, okay, when is it starting? When is it actually going to get out into the world? So it was very much all you. And I just held the pom-pom and said, you can do it. Help me help you. When can you interview me? I want to be on in this. So.
Oh, well, we need people behind us with pom-poms to keep us going, especially as entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
So we're going to start a tradition today, and I'm hopefully with everyone that's joining us today will really enjoy it. I'm going to start with one question. So do you remember the day that you decided to start your business, and what made you say, I'm doing this?
That is a great question. Do I remember the actual day? You know what? My idea for Women Living Big came when I was in a yoga class, and I was in Shavasana, which is the position where we're supposed to be quiet and not thinking and just resting after having sweated it up throughout the whole class. And I always have loved being around people, and women especially. And I'm a big believer in living out your bucket list. Although I've come to realize it's about creating an unbucket list, i.e. the things that not necessarily that you want to do, the things that you don't want to do, the things that scare you the most, because those are the ones that are going to help grow you the most. But in this particular moment, I thought if I could create a community where women wanted to push themselves and do things that made them feel alive in a place that they felt safe, that they could encourage and cheer each other on, that I would be helping women live their biggest lives, live in honor, leave the honor and legacy that I want to do for my mom, and also push ourselves past what we thought we could do. I'm like, how cool would that be if I had other people that I could play with and go on adventures with and check things off the bucket list with? So that was the idea that I had in my head, but at that point it was very much just an idea. And it took a long time before I actually got into serious action and created it. But that's sort of where it stemmed from. So
how long did it take you then from the time that you knew that you were going to be committed to it until you decided to launch it?
About a year. So I continue to think about it. One of the big things that I think when you do have a dream or a goal, which is what you exemplified, is to share it, to speak it out loud, to tell your friends and your network about it, because the more you talk about it, the more it becomes real. And even if you haven't figured out the how yet, you start getting into solution mode as soon as you make that announcement to yourself, because your brain is like, oh, okay, this is happening. How is it going to happen? And so I held a focus group. So I reached out to women that I knew, both friends and in the community, and fellow entrepreneurs, although at that time I was just starting out, wasn't an entrepreneur yet, and said, hey, I have this idea, would you come over? And so I fed them, and we had wine, and there were 12 women that came, and I had basically created a presentation of all of my ideas and said, what do you think? Would this work? Would you like events? Would you like smaller groups? What do you want? And I also had some ideas of logos at that point. So it was basically just a brainstorming and feedback session. And I'm forever grateful for the women that were at that table. And some of them were really excited. And they're like, okay, when's your first event going to be? And so after that, I thought, okay, well, I've got to make this happen. But it very much was about surrounding myself with people who were encouraging me, as you said, and cheering me on and continuing to talk about it. And from there, I launched with my first event called Bubbles and Bucket Lists. And we had buckets, real buckets, and bubbles, bubbly for all, and took people through the importance of creating a bucket list and what it was, what it looked like. And then I had trigger questions and exercises to allow ourselves to get into the space of what is possible. And I still sometimes deliver that workshop, and it's not, I mean, I love goals, and I'm very much a sucker for having action plans and strategy and, time oriented and all that jazz. But I feel like with bucket lists, you're allowed to think and dream bigger without figuring out how you're going to make it work. You're not committing to something to be done at a certain time in a certain way to measure. It really is just about dreaming big. And so in that space where you're surrounded with a lot of women and, you're drinking a glass of bubbly and have all these colored papers everywhere, you start to think about things that you never maybe thought of before, like meeting Oprah or climbing Kilimanjaro or, going skydiving, whatever it is. And from that space, we then launched our first series of events based on what a lot of women wanted to do. So it was pretty neat.
So BIG is an acronym, because I know that because I learned at your event. Can you just go over a little bit about what BIG is for you? Because I know we know about living big, but I know you can even sort of bring it down even to another level for us.
Absolutely. So living big does mean something different to everyone. But for me and for the women I've worked with, there seems to be some common elements. And I think if you really do want to be living your biggest life, or even bigger than you already are, it requires you to be brave. It requires you to live an inspired life, and it requires you to get into action. So I'll give a little bit of a background on each. Brave just means, are you brave enough to be you? Are you brave enough to face your fears and take action in spite of them? And there's a few different ways we can get our brave on: physiology-wise, psychology-wise, and expression-wise, expressology, I call it. So the language we use to ourselves and also to other people. In terms of inspired, are you living in alignment with your goals, your values, your purpose, what really turns you on and lights you up and, lights your fire? And there's bunch of different ways that we can do that. And then finally, get into action. We spend so much time in our head, especially as women. And there are three big, what I call bravery killers. These are perfectionism, people pleasing, and paralysis, percolating, pausing, procrastinating. This idea that we're always waiting to feel good enough, waiting to feel ready, waiting for all of our ducks to be in a row, or the perfect moment to magically arrive. And so in order to get beyond those, we have to get into action, even if it's not in the area that we want to boost our confidence, which is why so many of our events include some sort of physical activity that kind of forces you to get into action and physically get out of your comfort zone. So all of a sudden, what becomes possible just skyrockets.
I can remember even being fearful to tell people that I was thinking of starting my own business.
Really?
But then it was just because I thought, oh, what if I'm a failure? It was all about fear and getting past fear, and made a big difference.
It's a huge thing, and not only for entrepreneurs, but for everyone. And I was just writing my weekly blog all about the fear of rejection specifically, and sharing a story of how I was rejected earlier this week by a boy. You'll have to read the blog. And
I will. Oh, and you know what? Let's plug that anyone that wants your newsletter each week. I love your newsletters. In fact, I don't get to read it right away, but I read it earlier this morning. I'm going, oh, I love this. So we'll put it in the show notes where they can connect and so you can get their email so that you can get the weekly newsletter. You've got to do this, guys. It's really great. Gets me going.
Oh, you're so sweet. Well, it's because I'm not afraid to actually get real and share what's really going on. So the fear of rejection, all fears are so huge, and it is what holds us back. But we all have them. And so it's about learning to act in spite of our fears. And there was this great story in Big Magic that Elizabeth Gilbert wrote, talking about the fact that anytime we're going to embark on a new creative endeavor or something that scares us a little bit, fear, we're never going to be able to get rid of it. And so it's about inviting fear along for the ride. And she says, anytime I'm going to start something new, I say, all right, come on board with me. You can even ride in the passenger seat if you want, but I will never let you take the wheel. So it's about recognizing our fear is going to be there, especially if it's something that we really want to do. If it's really connected to who we are and the difference and impact we want to make, we're going to have fear there because we want to do it right. We want, we want to make sure that people see us for who we really are and the work that we really want to do. So we can't get rid of it, but we have to recognize we can use that and say, okay, this is helping me get closer to what I'm really supposed to be doing. So yes, it's going to be uncomfortable, and yes, it's going to be fearful, but as long as you don't take over, then you can invite it along.
I think the life is an adventure anyway. And what happens today, as you get older, you feel, that it's not forever. Whatever you do is not forever. You can always move past. If it's a mistake, you can get past it. And when you make mistakes as you get older, it's easier to get past them because you've learned those coping tools or tools that you show women in Big, to be able to get past that next point, to not to stop yourself, right, from growing. So
I think you've learned a lot of tools. I mean, you have some really varied and incredible experience behind your belt, Penny, and I think that you have learned amazing tools to be able to shorten that gap between, okay, made a mistake and turn my path or go a different direction or try something new. But not everybody is able to do that. And I think because you're so great at taking action, then you can recognize in that moment, okay, there is actually no such thing as mistakes, because it's just leading you closer to figuring out what it is that you do want, or closer to figuring out what it is that you don't want. And both are equally as valuable, but it is just about being in motion or being in momentum, taking action in some way, shape, or form, because if we spend our whole life waiting, then we'll never know, right?
So I think there's probably one question that everyone that's listening here today may probably wonder: how you ever decided to go and live in a different country every month for a year. To me, it's just like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine doing that. But what an adventure for you.
It was very much an adventure. And I will have to say that I sort of caught my travel bug early in that, sharing briefly my story, which you already know, Penny, my number one fan, it was there at every opening and every closing of every show I ever did, because my big dream was always to get to Broadway, was my mom. And I eventually moved back home to look after her, felt purpose for the first time in my life. And when she passed away, I lost my purpose and lost my number one fan and lost me. And so I took off, and I spent a lot of time traveling and living in a lot of different places. And you read a lot of them in my bio already. And that's when I, met a man, moved into his van, went apple picking for a year, and lived in ashrams, practicing intense yoga and meditation, and yes, shaved my head to raise money for breast cancer. And it was because every time I came home, I wasn't ready to face life without that one person who believed in me. I wasn't brave enough to be who I was without my biggest fan and cheerleader. And so I kept taking off again. And I got this love of travel because it allowed me to sort of forget the pressures and the expectations and the reputations and everything back home, and just be me, and also connect with people on a soulful level. When you meet people from all different cultures, you get to see that at the end of the day, people are people, and we all have hopes and we all have fears. And it was really neat to connect and learn different languages and get to know different cultures. And so even though I came home eventually and was like, I need to figure out my life and, do something with myself and my education, I always wanted to keep going away. And then somebody told me about this organization called Remote Year, where you could actually live and travel and work all at the same time. So I thought, what? How? That sounds amazing. And so I applied, and it turns out that they take care of all the logistics. So there were 78 of us who were accepted into my cohort from all around the world. And the itinerary is already set up for you. All the flights are already all set up, the accommodation, your co-working space. And basically, so long as you can do the work that you do from home, wherever in the world, then you too can apply and be a part of this. And it was really interesting. When I finally found out that I did actually get accepted, because there was a long journey of essays and interviews and applications, whatnot, I thought, okay, if I get in, I got to go. And then I did. And I thought, oh my gosh, can I make this happen? Can I actually do this? But because I do want to practice what I preach and, talk about getting out of your comfort zone as the real opportunity to live your biggest life, I had to say yes and give it a go. Although I will be honest with you, I'm also somebody who loves saying yes to the adventure. And it's in some ways almost easier for me to take off and chase the next big, exciting dream than it is to focus and stay in one place and commit to creating, a life that's more settled, which is ultimately, I think, what I want. But that's tough too. So we all have a different comfort zone. We all have different things that excite us or scare us, right?
I think the most important thing is recognizing just what you said, that you do like the adventure. And once you know that, then it kind of like, okay, well, I do like the adventure, so it's okay to do this. And I'm learning every time I go into it a different adventure. So it's pretty, I really think it's all about knowing yourself and then getting more comfortable with your decisions. It just comes more naturally.
And I think that you're so right in that, Penny. And we have to be willing to do the work to find out what's true to ourselves and what are our own values, as opposed to those that may have been imposed on us from mentors or friends or parents or teachers. And the top regret of the dying, there's an amazing article called The 5 Regrets of the Dying, written by someone who did a lot of work with those facing end of life and loss. And a lot of this research I did when I was doing my thesis on end of life discourse, motivated by my experience with my mom. But the number one regret is wishing I had lived a life true to me instead of one others expected of me. And I think so many of us, especially women, go after what they think they're supposed to go after, or do things that they think they're supposed to do because it's what's expected of them, or what society tells them, or what their parents have told them, or what everybody else around them is doing. And I think we need to take the time and be willing to do that self-exploration that you were speaking of, to ask ourselves the tough questions and to be honest with ourselves in terms of, are we doing what we want to do? Are we living true to who we are? Or are we doing what we think we're supposed to be doing so that we get the approval, or we get noticed, or we can keep up with the Joneses, right?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that I'm wondering you can share with us, because you have had so many adventures, and to us it sounds so glamorous and so amazing. And it's so funny because I think that happens to a lot of our stories when we tell them, people listening to them go, oh, that's amazing. But there's absolutely a time when you definitely have barriers because we're human. So have you ever come across barriers and said, oh, wow, this is too big for me, or I've got to learn to get past this?
Every day. um, Part of the reason why I think I can say yes to adventures is because when you're flying by the seat of your pants and you're stuck on the coast of Colombia and you have no choice but to share a tent that's then getting rained in on as all of a sudden floodgates opened when it never rains, and you're, forced to get to know this person from a different country as you're soaking and wake up wrinkled in the middle of the night. You never know. So you have to just be faced with whatever's happening and be able to run on the fly. But barriers come up on a regular basis when you're in the process of figuring out who you're supposed to be, and you want to do the best work that you can do, and you want to contribute and make an impact, and honor yourself and honor the legacy that you want to leave for others as well as you, and be a good person and I think luckily we have our whole lives to be a work in progress, but I would be lying if I said it was glamorous all the time. I mean, I shared with you before this interview, that I wasn't necessarily having the greatest day. I had doubts. I had, earlier this week was faced with rejection, and I think it's par for the course. And I think the universe doesn't put anything in front of us that we can't face. In the moment, we may not feel ready, and it might feel like we're questioning what it is that we're doing, or there are weeks, days where I'm like, maybe I should just get a job, maybe I should throw in the towel and go back. But I think that's the hardest thing and the most fulfilling thing is trying to honor our calling. And I think that's definitely going to come with barriers. And yes, absolutely, I wonder, am I doing the right thing? Is this helping who I'm supposed to be helping? Am I targeting the right people? Is my business model what it's supposed to be? Am I prioritizing what I'm supposed to be prioritizing? I mean, it's absolutely challenging, and it's not always glamorous, and I am human like everyone. And if I get caught up in the Instagram highlight reel of other people's lives, I can quickly go down the rabbit hole, so I don't. But yes, to answer your question, which was, do I come across barriers? Absolutely. I hope the next question is going to be what do I do when those come up?
That's right. You guessed it. Yeah, is there something that you have, like a secret that you want to tell us and say, this is what I do? Share with us.
Well, there are a few things that I do. So I'm very fortunate that I have a lot of great people in my life, including yourself. And I think one of the most important things is to surround yourself by what I call your positive peeps posse. So people who are going to lift you up, who are going to cheerlead you, who are going to encourage you on the days where you feel down, because we all will. So whether or not that's a certain friend that you call when dealing with certain crises in certain areas of your life, or a sister entrepreneur who you can call when you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? But we definitely need a support system. That's first and foremost. And then the second thing that I do is, depending on what it is that I'm going through, I also allow myself to feel it. So, the other night, I will totally admit, I made popcorn and watched some Netflix. And I don't do that all the time, but sometimes we got to allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling so that we can then, move through it and move on. But I think if we continue to bury down and tell ourselves, oh, just choose to be happy, choose to feel this, like, we can't experience the highs without the lows. So we have to be prepared to feel all the feels and be comfortable in the uncomfort, the discomfort of feeling those things. So I think that's the second thing. And then the third thing, what I do on a regular basis is I go back to my vision, to my why, who I want to help. And then another trick that I have, and that I teach and encourage other women that I work with to do, is to have a physical love notes file. So whether or not that's in your inbox, or whether or not that's a physical envelope, but any feedback or any lovely words or notes or thank you cards that you've received from people over the years through your work, I sometimes go back to that. Not sometimes, on a regular basis I do, so that when I'm doubting myself, I can think back to just that one person who may have gotten some help or encouragement or some inspiration at one point, and that helps fuel me and get me back on track.
Oh, that's wonderful. I sometimes have a journal. I'm not always really good at it, but I like having a journal that just reminds me on where I started and where I'm going. So the last question I have, which is supposed to be tradition as well, we'll see how that goes, is if you had one thing you wanted to tell a female entrepreneur that you would have liked to have heard before when you were starting out, what message would that be?
You already have all that you need in order to succeed. You will never arrive, and you're already there, and you will only be the best in the world at being yourself.
That's a good ending. Well, thanks again, Carol, for coming. It's just wonderful. And hopefully we'll have you back next year, because I'm already talking about next year.
I love it. Good for you. Big visions. I love it.
Big vision. Yeah. No, what is it? Well, it doesn't matter. I'd mess up the cliche, I'm sure, anyway. But it is a vision. And when your heart is in it, it's meant to be, for sure.
Absolutely. And congratulations. I salute you. Hats off to you. I'm so excited for you. And I think you're up to big things with this Women in Biz, Ladies in Biz.
I really hope it helps a lot of women help them in their business and realize that they're not alone in what they're going through. Many women have gone through the same thing. Okay, well, thanks again. See you next year.
Thanks for listening to the Ladies in Biz. Send us your comments on ladiesinbiz.com. We would like to hear from you.